Why did the iconic event of the 1960s happen in this sleepy Catskill mountain village? How did Woodstock, New York, become the most famous small town in the world? Perhaps because it happened to be a place where since 1902, people had been able to pursue their dreams and ideals in a community outside the mainstream. This is their story, then and now.
I'm standing in White Pines, which was the home that Ralph and Jane Whitehead had built for themselves around 1903 at the Bergcliff Arts and Crafts community in Woodstock. Ralph and Jane had actually been seeking to establish a utopian community for artists and craftsmen for at least 10 years, but it was here in Woodstock in 1902 that their dreams came true.
It's hard to be objective about what Woodstock really means to me because I've lived here my entire life and it's sort of such a part of who I am as a person, so it's a hard question to answer.
Today, economic historians are in general agreement that the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s in England was the most significant event in the history of human evolution since the domestication of animals and plants. John Ruskin and William Morris would have also added workers to that list, as a result of their being made subservient to machinery. It was in rebellion to what they saw as the devaluation of human life that they founded the arts and crafts movement in the 1860s, in the belief that a simpler life would result in both spiritual and physical health when transformed in a rural setting. A conscious choice to make do with fewer possessions and less material wealth, and to find fulfillment through the dignity of labor. We would now call this back to nature.
These were the things that were important, not industrial activity, and especially not working in a factory. That was what the whole arts and crafts movement was directed against, was wage slavery.
William Morris yearned for the restoration of an organic way of life, which utilized machines only to alleviate human burdens. One of their unlikely recruits, Ralph Radcliffe Whitehead, a lanky, sandy-haired, reserved young man, also shared their dream of a more humane existence for those who toiled in mind-numbing, brutal factories and for the unemployed artists and craftsmen replaced by the machine age.
The sense of a group of people who were innovative and creative and interested above all in living in a way that emphasized the less commercial aspects of life, emphasized the arts, music, literature, the theater. All that came into being in 1902 when the Woodstock Art Colony was started. What they wanted was a place of which John Ruskin would have approved, and that meant that it had to be at an elevation of from 1,000 to 1,500 feet. Ruskin believed that higher elevations were too harsh for people to live in and do creative work. Also a place, for economic reasons, fairly close to large centers of population. Thus they could sell their products, which they hoped to make, their furniture and their textiles and their pottery and the other craft objects. That was the beginning.
Yeah, I guess Woodstock gives you a vast world view, but then you're stuck in a small town, so you can't really do anything with that world view. And so you have to leave that environment in order to do what you want to do based on what's been instilled in you by your parents, by your upbringing, and having exposure to what most people growing up in small towns aren't exposed to.
Thanks.
you know, more what I was steeped in my childhood was, I guess, what would be the earlier qualities of the Catskill area. Area inhabited by artistic but very hardworking farmers and, you know, regular people that weren't really robe-wearing, moon-dancing, you know, fairies of the wilderness.
Everybody was always talking about Woodstock. And I said to myself, when I get the chance, this is it. I was looking for the allegorical garden that Thoreau talked about. Excellent.
Soaking wet.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, I think...
That's no good. We can't be...
We can't pay that. No, I think we need to... yeah.
I just have to turn the water off and all the water will drain back to the basement.
I find it ironic that we work on this building, we beautify it, and that there have been museum catalogs about the objects in this building, the furniture and the prints and everything else. And that's how I remember all these folks who really had very revolutionary ideals and who were much more interested in using these handmade objects and this art to change lives and get away from mass production and other things they found as ugly. And today we don't remember any of that. We just have the pretty building and the pretty objects.
It was during Whitehead's years on the continent that he first met Jane Bird McCall, the woman who would eventually become his fellow dreamer and, after overcoming certain social hurdles, his lifelong partner. Holding the same ideals in social reform that Ruskin had instilled in them both, they left the late Victorian social mores behind them, and the couple moved to California, where they bought a 200-acre estate, Arcady, on the sunny, jagged shores of Montecito, just outside Santa Barbara, to live out their ideals of the simple life movement. But Arcady was too grand, and in order to live like peasants and educate their sons to be men with souls, things had to change. As fate would have it, Ralph would meet the two people destined to walk with him on that road that would finally lead to Woodstock and the search for Utopia. Just as Whitehead rewrote his destiny from a future capitalist into a social reformer intent on creating a utopian community of artists, Hervey White reinvented his life from the son of a sodhouse farmer in Kansas to a Harvard University graduate, world traveler, poet, novelist, and community worker in Chicago.
There ever was a man who embodied the free, living, intelligent, energetic American who had cut his ties to Europe and become a new kind of human being. It was Hervey White. He had it all. Very much like Walt Whitman in that way, except that in appearance, he was very agile, very quick. When you saw him moving, you thought he might have been a dancer, a ballet dancer. When I first saw him, that was a thought that came into my mind. He moved with grace, remarkable grace.
He looked very elegant. He looked terrifically elegant.
Oh, yes, and that's
Yes.
smock.
That's smock.
Tell me
And
how.
beard.
Smock.
The shirt, Russian shirt.
Russian blouse.
With a belt.
Blouse, yeah.
With a belt.
But
And
to see
high
him,
neck.
to see him walking through the woods with an enormous green log on his shoulder and an axe in his
And
hand.
very slender.
This was
Straight.
illustration for
Yeah.
some. Yeah.
Oh, he was beautiful.
It was absolutely beautiful. It's beautiful, erect,
A very erect,
skinny,
stride.
big beard, wonderful. Not a big beard, not a big beard.
And while he was at Harvard, he was very poor. And they say that he used to go into the restaurants there and get a glass of water, which was free, and add mustard and ketchup, which was also free to it, and that was his lunch. And when he graduated from Harvard, Hervey went on a walking tour of Europe. He spent about 50 cents a day. And then when he came back, he went to Hull House in Chicago, which was the beginning of the settlement house movement in the United States. And there he lived for, I think it was 4 years. And he started a craft program, a furniture making program, which, as he remembered it in later life, had only one success. They sold a bench for the waiting room of a dentist in Chicago. Apart from that, it was an economic failure. At that time, Whitehead was considering building a art colony. And when discussed it with Herbie White, he found that Herbie Whitehead had similar ideas. So the two had a common idea, and of course Whitehead had the money, so he hired Herbie White. He paid him a salary.
But Whitehead felt that one more person was still needed for the quest. That person was Bolton Brown.
Bolton Brown was on board as one of the scouts, and so was Herbie White. And Bolton Brown was the person, as you know, that came up with the idea of moving here.
While Ralph Whitehead and Hervey White traveled to the mountains of Virginia and the Carolinas to find the perfect place for the colony, Brown, who was an avid climber and outdoor enthusiast, was sent to the Catskills. On a crisp May morning in 1902, Brown hiked up Overlook Mountain and stood in the notch at Mead's Hotel. Brown asked an old man working nearby the name of the earthly paradise that stretched below. "That's Woodstock," the man replied. Only 100 miles from New York City, Woodstock fit Ruskin's requirements of the landscape and location. After some hesitation, Ralph Whitehead suddenly made up his mind. Well, all right, let's have it here.
Before 1902, he'd spent some time at a hotel in the Catskills, and the hotel was largely Jewish, and he had taken a violent dislike to the whole region. He didn't want to come to Woodstock. But Bolton Brown felt the Catskills were the place and came here and eventually built Birdcliff and Woodstock, largely because there were no Jews here. This was the result of a kind of policy. It wasn't a matter of law, but it was just that local people would have felt that they would be ostracized by their neighbors if they sold property to a Jew.
Valley, did you say, where yourself that knows that it is for me that day? Your husband was the only man sat behind the wall. My old man McGinnis couldn't get a job at all. Rise up, Mrs. Riley, don't give away to booze. You and I'll color shine, new bonnets and new shoes.
When people came to Birdcliff, Whitehead in his mind would assign them a place. He was like a generous and kindly English landlord at Birdcliff. They would have parties every week in the art school there, which was the social center. And Ralph Whitehead and Mrs. Whitehead would dance with all the servants and with all the students there, every one. They wouldn't miss anyone.
I got to do a suggestion inside.
Okay.
Can you open the door for me?
The idea is that, you know, he developed his own fascination with the environment and with the ecology, and that's his motivation. Whereas Greta, her motivation is to help her neighborhood because she really is from the Bronx. So she's not a biology nerd, but she wants to create this city where she lives to make it a better place.
The furniture created at Birdcliff that Whitehead hoped would produce a steady stream of income proved too time-consuming and costly to be commercially viable, and disagreements between Whitehead and his colonists emerged over how the community should operate. This wasn't how the original colony members imagined their ideal artist's life at Birdcliff, and within 2 years of its founding, the first cracks in the colony began straining relationships. Brown, unhappy with not heading the Birdcliff Art School, protested to Whitehead.
Whitehead found Bolton too aggressive, too sure of himself, and he was not in sympathy with many of his ideas, although he recognized Bolton Brown's skill as a designer, as a painter, as an organizer, And so at the end of the first year, he asked Bolton Brown to leave. And the reason he gave was, Mr. Brown, you have mistaken your place. It was very clear. And so Brown left, but Brown said, well, Mr. Whitehead, will you object if I settle in the neighborhood? And Whitehead said, well, not at all, not at all. I don't know anyone who wouldn't be happy to have you as a neighbor. So you see, there is this. It's contradictory, and yet it's understandable. In 1902, when Birdcliff was bought, was a magnificent season with a great deal of rain and sunshine in between and roses with the size of cabbages and everything. Nature did her best that year, and it charmed Whitehead when he came near at the end of May. It was a fairyland, Woodstock. But immediately after he had been ensnared by the landscape, it started to deteriorate, and by 1904, there was hardly any rain. And they had a herd of cattle. Everyone at Birdcliff got milk from the cows, and Herbie White, in his democratic way, decided the proper thing to do was to give everyone proportionately less milk, which he did, and that included Whitehead. It never occurred to him that Whitehead would object, but he did. He said, here I am running this whole thing, I paid for it all, it's my show, and I can't even get enough milk from it for my family. And so at that, Herbie decided he'd had it and announced that he was leaving.
Though Hervey White determined the Birdcliff artist community model was wrong, he felt that the location of Woodstock was right, and he swung into action, raising money and creating his own artist community. Only a few miles from Birdcliff, down the mountain and across the town line, in the Hurley Patentee Woods, he named it the Maverick, after the legendary western horse that knows no master, and it would become in short order a rural version of Hull House. Birdcliff began with the power of wealth behind it, and now the Maverick was about to prove the power of poverty when yoked to a spirit of sharing and freedom. It was at Hull House in Chicago that White saw at first hand the economic problems that stopped the creative development of talented young people, and he resolved to create an ideal environment that would allow writers, musicians and artists to freely explore their creative potential without overwhelming financial pressures.
I've been going to the Art Students League for 4 years, and I thought I could never stay away from New York, ever. One day I decided I'd had it. So I came to Woodstock, and it was shockingly beautiful at the time. I knew that I was going to spend the rest of my life here. I just was convinced of it.
At that time, there was no discussion of future, and we all decided to go up to Woodstock and didn't want to be wage slaves in New York, and lived life of freedom and opportunity to pursue our work.
I was working at the New York Public Library in Science and Technology. Beautiful job for a painter. They wanted me to go to library school. I got to Woodstock. I had about $1.50 left of the money that I had started with. I thought I'd ask somebody where Arnold Blanche lived, because I was told by somebody in New York, go see Arnold Blanche in Woodstock.
And that's me, and that's Arnold Blanche.
The chief of the young tribe Mavericks.
Because of Arnold and Harry, they had heard of Woodstock and Hervey White's colony of the Maverick.
The original impetus for these artist colonies was a place where artists could have a retreat, be free from financial considerations, just practice their art, enjoy the company of fellow artists, appreciate audiences, have a good time. And to a large extent, that's still happening at Maverick concerts, with the great musicians we get coming from all over the world to play here, spend a few days relaxing and enjoying the countryside and being part of an artist colony.
The rebellious youth at the dawn of a new century, many of them children of recent immigrants, discovered art as an escape hatch from parental control and domination. Many of these young, ambitious artists joined the Art Students League in New York, which operated based on unique liberal policies, including no entrance requirements or grading, with classes taught by a progressive faculty.
In those days, you couldn't get any drugs, so I wasn't interested in the drug experience. I matured late sexually before I found out what great ecstasy that was. So the objective of everybody in Chicago was to get to New York. I got to New York, and of course, I went to the Art Students League. I said, freedom, you know, liberty, creativity, all those wonderful, wonderful aesthetic experiences.
When I went to the League on a scholarship and wanted to join a painting class, there was no room for me. And I turned away in great disappointment, and a very pretty girl, a beautiful little girl in back of me said, "Don't go away, why don't you join the modeling class?" And that was Hannah Small.
I don't take off much at a time. A very helpful thing is to use a looking glass. If you're ever stuck and you're not sure how something's going, the reversed position helps immediately.
At the League, we met Arnold Blanche in one of our classes, and because of Arnold Blanche, a gentleman friend of his came to call, who became my ex-husband. That's Harry.
Here it is in November. Not a soul around but me. I have 4 cottages here. You go back to New York, but next spring you come back with 4 couples. Which I did.
We had no light, we had kerosene lamps, we had no water, we had a great 550-foot deep well. We had to pump to get our water.
As an art student living at the Maverick, I honestly thought that I would live in a garret, or the equivalent of a garret, all my life. I really thought so.
Pretty nice garret.
And it was only then when I got with Hannah, we moved out of the Maverick, and it was still the idea that we would be struggling artists all our lives. And it never occurred to us that we would have security.
In spring, it was covered with wild strawberries. If you can imagine the aroma and the delight of them. There were apples, there were blueberries, there were huckleberries, there were fruit trees of all kinds. Hannah and I would carve the boulders in the fields and the wood from the trees. I don't know how we got tools and all that sort of thing, but that seems to be unimportant at the moment. But from the sale of the frames and the Blanches from the sale of their lampshades and their weaving, and Carl was already making money selling some of his beautiful pottery. We existed, and we existed well, though other people wouldn't think so. And the reason for the Maverick festivals was the fact that Hervey he was very stubborn. he struck rock, the blue stone that Woodstock is built on practically, and he wouldn't stop until they drilled 550 feet. And in order to pay that off, he had to do something, and that's when he established the Maverick festivals.
They found a quarry on the Maverick property, which they converted into a festival space, and he invited up dancers and performers from New York. He had musicians put on outdoor performances on the night of the full moon in August. This is the origin of the famous, if not notorious, Maverick festivals that started on this occasion in 1915. And at that time, he made a speech where he promised that next year, not only would there be a festival, he would also have built a concert hall to house the musical performances. And after the first year, these festivals gained momentum until in 1930, finally they had gotten out of control. They went all night long. So by 1930, they had attracted negative attention from the police and the authorities, and they had gotten too extreme even for White's taste, so he ended them then.
In the early days of both the Bird Cliff and the Maverick colonies, music was sort of an adjunct to the art activities. They brought along friends who were musicians. They might have given some informal concerts. Things changed pretty drastically in 1916 when Georges Barrère, one of the great musicians of his time, a flute player, a conductor, an advocate of new music, came up to Woodstock just for vacation to see what the place was like, and he loved it. The musical season ended with the beginning of the summer, and people who played in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, the New York Philharmonic, the Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra had no jobs for the summer, and it was musicians from those orchestras and other groups like them who populated the early Maverick concerts. Those were actually organizations that contributed musicians to the early Maverick seasons.
A little bit. I don't know if.
Yeah.
It's more like dum dum.
We had nothing. In the very cold winters, we had outhouses to begin with. We had small drum stoves to heat the place. And fortunately, there were lots of trees about. And not only the men cut the trees down, but Hannah and I and Lucille sawed them on sawhorses. We had these large tin tubs like this, and that's how we bathed, in front of the little drum stoves. And in summer, we bathed by putting a spigot, a faucet, into a pail and hanging it up, and that was the shower.
At that time, they were freer than most people in Woodstock.
In Woodstock?
We don't know.
You think,
you mean in the
you think Elsie Spiker was screwing around, for
We don't
heaven's
know.
sakes?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I don't know either.
I'm going around saying people are...
And then in 1929, this committee of 50 was formed. It consisted of 5 people. And they sent out a letter to Woodstock people from the committee of 50, urging them to keep a notebook and a pencil handy, and if they saw nudity, especially nude bathing and lewd talk, and so on, to call the sheriff's office. And they gave his phone number, 494 or something like that. Call the sheriff at once.
There was a Ku Klux Klan meeting. It was in front of where the theater now is, in that field. It was just a field.
That's right.
And they had the fiery cross, they had the sheets. They put the women on one side and the men on the other, and we were kind of scared but also interested.
You all went?
We all went.
Yes.
And Dudley Diggs, who was on the man's side, would yell things across to his wife, Mary, we've got to go home. We've got to get up early tomorrow to go to Mass. He, you know, facts like that.
Created a tremendous furor in Woodstock. It was directed largely at the Maverick festivals, which Harvey was holding then.
They put signs on people's doors, get married or else, and things like that.
Is that true?
Absolutely
yes.
true. I remember the Batemans had a sign on their door, get married or else. That was signed the KKK. May I say what
wonderful.
Petra's idea of married folks was? I'm going to say it. Petra thought a married man was something you found in the bushes at a Maverick festival. Honestly.
That's wonderful. I like that.
I like it too. And it was true up to a point.
To a certain extent.
The phrase Woodstock Nation came into being in 1969 when the Woodstock Festival was held 60 miles from Woodstock, New York, although it was planned to be held in Woodstock originally. Today, we have a class of people who are doing quite well. Doctors, dentists, lawyers, professional people, and business people, people who have shops, people who manufacture. There is a large, prosperous middle class, and many of the Woodstock Nation people were the children of these people, who had many of them been born in poverty, but had become quite well off. And if you go over the biographies of these people, you see that this pops up all the time. There was a prosperous family behind them, and they rebelled against the emptiness of the kind of life to which they seemed destined, which was the pursuit of more money.
The first time I heard about Woodstock was on a trip to Montreal with my parents when I was very young. My mother liked to stop in Woodstock to see the galleries, and I guess I must have been 5 or 6.
Friends and neighbors, I'm gonna leave you.
When we first moved up here, we lived up in Bird Cliff. Rented one of Peter Whitehead's cabins up there. And Bob was a neighbor, and we had known him since about 1961 or 62 in New York at the time. And he lived a stone's throw away from us up in Bird Cliff. And he was also raising a family at the time. He was having a series of babies at the time, he and his wife, and we had a family going, and so we did a lot of family things together.
When I dream of Appalachia.
When I first came to Woodstock, I discovered that there were a number of people my age, a lot of them from the city, people who were, many of them involved in folk music, alternate lifestyles.
Building this house was strictly a whimsical thing, a classic version of a person having an idea and setting about doing it without any thought about falling off the roof or hitting my hand or can I afford it. I just had what I had and looked around for the cheapest way of doing it. And you still can do it today. Everything about a house I had never done before, so everything was the first time. And I set about building what I thought a house was, which came from my memories as a child of seeing a picture in a magazine of a Tudor French gatehouse by a bridge. And I wanted to build something that was very archetypical of useful architecture, and I was going to use it as a church. However, I got more and more away from the church as I got involved with worldly life down here, and I finally got back into music about 1979 or 1980. But in those 3 years, I spent the summers out here when it was warm, just with a hammer and a saw and a drill, just carving each little piece and putting it on. It took a long time, very slow, but I had no deadline. The well cost $700, almost as much as the house. And $50 for nails and screws and whatever and hinges. So you have a house for $1,200.
Good water.
It's actually not too bad. There's like a lot of crazy roots.
Yeah, that's what I have now.
Yeah.
See?
All right.
that was it?
Yeah,
That's
easy,
it.
painless, quick, painless. And you get rewards.
I'm sorry, I said I knew you.
So you have it all worked out. Yeah, I'm the field organizer for the area. I think that it is the civil rights movement of my generation. And it's the only thing that's ever made me fulfilled in a way that I've wanted to.
You grew up in the Bronx.
I did.
And so how did you, what made you want to be, a folk singer where you were living on the planet where you were playing music?
Well, I went to high school at the High School of Music and Art in Manhattan. And in that particular school at that particular time, a lot of them were kind of the kids of radical families. So they introduced me to a concert by Pete Seeger. He was a guy who was making music that I could relate to. I could sing along with. I could even think about going out and getting a banjo myself and playing this music.
We were called disreputable musicians. For our freedom,
in 1961, I first heard Pete Seeger sing "We Shall Overcome" and learned all the civil rights and banned the bomb tunes that were being sung at protest marches. And that sort of got me going.
People were rebelling, people were passionate.
The idea is you could use song or sung vows to raise your fist up against injustice.
I was the first organizer with the Human Rights Campaign and really felt like I made a huge impact on New York and in my district, and actually made a difference this time, and felt like the senators that I was working on were affected by my work. Watching Stephen Saland be the vote that made it so that we won marriage was one of the most important moments of my life.
It's like in the analogy of a farmer. You got to lay down the crops. You got to plow and plant and then let the beautiful corn come up.
We had no idea if we were going to win. I had spent 5 months of my life devoted to making sure that he knew that his constituents supported this. In Maine, we had a really discouraging loss. I got spit on by people. I would be called a disgusting dyke. As a straight woman who, I'm Middle Eastern, but nobody knows that. Everyone thinks I'm a white woman. I never experienced that kind of hatred where people hate you because of something they think that you are.
Thousands of demonstrators opposed to the Vietnam War assembled in the nation's capital for a mass protest.
In the case of the 60s, it was such a crazy, uprooted time. So no matter how much we protested against the war machine, the war went on.
Our generation is just incredibly distracted by TV and video games, so we're a lot lazier, so it really isn't much of a comparison.
First winter we lived here, there were two guys living in teepees out in the field, and I mean, I don't know how they could stand it. And there was the farmhouse. It felt like so desolate up here. And we would just forget that there was even a world. We would be up here for days and days. It was really incredible sometimes, and then sometimes it would be just like we'd be desperate for people to talk to.
We had the health food store in Woodstock, but it was too great a distance to travel. It's 30 miles away, and we wanted to be able to root ourselves in something that's here.
But we couldn't arrange with the owner to buy the land. It was too expensive.
part of what I'm figuring out about this whole farming thing is that you really have to find a specific product that people are going to pay a little bit more money for. Because just selling vegetables to restaurants, which is what I was doing for a few years, just doesn't cut it. On a small scale too, because it was just me and a friend doing it. So I wasn't interested in having some massive property that I couldn't really put all of the care I wanted to. My friends would say, I can't believe you want to move back home, that kind of a thing. But for me, it wasn't really about that. It was about living somewhere where I had the possibility to do the things I wanted to do. In the city, although I really enjoyed my time there, I really didn't have any opportunity to control things for myself. I couldn't grow anything. I couldn't buy anything. Everything was so expensive. I had to work so hard just to pay my rent, and that didn't seem like enough for me. And the next few years, I really would love to have my own land and have a place where I am living sustainably and growing as much of my own food as possible and running a business. Something I've learned about living here and living in a place where you don't have all of the amenities that you're used to, it's very freeing because you realize you don't need that much. I have an outside shower and a composting toilet, and I don't really have a kitchen, but I love it here and I make do, and I think that you just realize how easy it is to live that way, and I would continue to do that in a second. But it's very time consuming. And right now I still work in a restaurant. I am still a bartender because I have to be able to support myself. I can't make money just selling sprouts and growing vegetables. So I think the ideal is being able to actually make this a reality and have it not just be a pipe dream. Because at this point, it still is. I'm still not supporting myself doing this. Get out of here.
My generation, I happen to be in this really wonderful position where you can blend the optimism of the kind of hippie generation with kind of a more pragmatic approach to how hard life can really be. And I feel like a lot of these hippies that moved up from urban areas or suburban areas up into the wilderness to kind of carve themselves out a life, kind of got chewed up and spat out. I think my father didn't do that, and I think he was able to establish himself in this area and establish himself in that generation because he had life skills. He came from a rural area where he was really required from a very early age to take care of himself.
Most important in my childhood was starting out with the great foundation of life on a farm. We had a wonderful piece of life there. It was unfortunate that it was so impoverished. I mean, we never were hungry, but we never had fancy stuff either,
A lot of the other members of his generation were coming from fairly well-off families, or at least insulated by the kind of suburban movements of the 50s and stuff. I mean, a lot of these kids are the children you know, war heroes coming back home and living in Levittown and that sort of thing. And when they broke away, you know, they broke away very extremely from one extreme to another. And a lot of times kind of incurred some pretty devastating life lessons along the way, where as he kind of had some grit by the time he wanted to move out and live in a redwood stump. You know, it wasn't just learning how to take a shit in the woods for the first time for him. You know, I mean, he has had an established life skills.
You might not have any money, and you might have to worry about the electric bill and everything, but there's a wonderful freedom here, you know.
Now you can walk through here, you'll see the real shop. 1950 vintage sawmill that makes this stuff we call rough cut lumber.
I can't go back to Rainbow Farms.
If this piece of land were mine, you can believe that there would be people up here this coming spring starting to build houses. I can't imagine a piece of land like this sitting like this, and I mean, nobody on it, wasted. It's absurd to me.
So where have we come in the last 42 years? God, we've come a long way and not very far at all. Thinking that we were going to change the world, to thinking that we couldn't change the world, to thinking that maybe we started to change the world.
You know, this thing, we shall overcome, was actually believed by my generation. We believed that we would somehow overcome through the use of singing and protest and nonviolent direct action, creativity, printing leaflets on our little mimeograph machines we had, and some of us in our houses.
I wish I could be a part of a culture like this where, you know, people were just making music that was great and they wanted to make art and live together.
No one took the time or had the inclination or the drive or the desire or the money to lay down permanent institutions, you know, colleges.
When I am petitioning or asking for volunteers, I do not go to music venues. All of these places you would think people would be interested in getting involved in their community with, you know, other young people to do something that would create change and be beneficial in a civil rights movement. This generation's civil rights movement, people do not care.
We didn't have the resources to set up long-term institutions, colleges. You know, we lost the battle of the textbooks in a way. We didn't put together enough brilliant writing.
Here and there, you build a fitting structure to rhyme with what's around it. The rocks, the meadow grass, the trees, the water. And learn to leave intact the wet roots of the swamp oak and the alder, and the trails of the deer up the ridgeway used these 30,000 years.
These are the same sounds that would have been heard during the performance of 4 minutes and 33 seconds. It's by John Cage, which was 4.5 minutes of David Tudor sitting at the piano without playing anything. And Cage had written it for this particular performance and knew that it was going to be this wonderful outdoor space.
Hello. Oh, I love your earring.
4 minutes and 33 seconds is divided into 3 movements. First one, you heard the wind and the trees, much like we're hearing now. And during the second movement, it rained. And during the third movement, people started muttering and complaining. And so Cage thought that was the structure of the music that got imposed by the 3 movements. The earliest we know that he actually talked about doing it was in 1948. He actually talked about making a silent disc and selling it to the Muzak Corporation. He was thinking about this in terms of a respite from Muzak, that if he could sell this to the Muzak company, they would have to play 4.5 minutes of silence. Because like lots of musicians in the 1940s, he was very, very disturbed by the emergence of Muzak. In the late 1940s, early 1950s, he was getting interested in Zen. And in the Zen idea that all reality is kind of continuous and non-distinct in a way, that if you're listening to birds or the wind, that's the same as listening to the piano or somebody's voice, that there was no distinction to be made between the sounds that musicians made and the sounds that just happen in the environment that you couldn't control. Cage had also become good friends with Marcel Duchamp. In a way, was doing the same kind of thing Cage would later do in 4 minutes and 33 seconds, exhibiting something that we do not think of as art as a work of art. And so for Cage, there was a kind of continuity between that and, in a sense, framing sounds. There was also Robert Rauschenberg had just made a group of white paintings, of totally white canvases that he just painted white. So for him, making 4 minutes and 33 seconds became the musical response to that. And he thought that music had to deal with that idea as well, that otherwise music would be lagging behind the visual arts. An anechoic chamber is a room that has been maximally soundproofed so that no sound is going in or out of the room. Instead of silence, he heard 2 sounds, and a high one and a low one. This convinced Cage that sound was going on all the time, whether we were paying attention to it or not. The Hudson Valley painters came up here from New York and painted nature up here as a way of creating American painting. Landscapes up here did not look like they did in Europe. The trees were redder because of all the maple trees up here. And so by painting what they saw up here, the Hudson Valley painters created American art. And I've always thought, in a sense, that what Cage did was come to this same landscape and listen to the American landscape. It was kind of a new birth for American music, which had still been, despite some American innovations, it's still been very, very influenced by European and judged very much by European standards. And in 1952, it was time to wipe the slate clean, which Cage did by coming up here and listening to this quintessentially American landscape.
In the end, it almost always never stays the same. By virtue of the sound, senses, it's in ripples, a wave, wind. Endless apologies for my wandering mind.
A similar experiment was begun in the year 2000 by a group here in Woodstock,
which gave so-called difficult teens a chance to realize their potential as artists. The Indie Program. 10 years and 500 students of video and new media later, members of the class of 2010 were taking part in their first exhibition at a prestigious gallery.
One side is sort of more documentary of the kind of summer experience of going through from one swimming hole to another and being with friends, and the beauty of the Catskills and water, and that kind of brief time in your life when out of high school, not quite an adult, the transient nature of that and kind of how beautiful it is. And a lot of times swimming holes are in private property. It's like almost incomprehensible that those kinds of places can be private and that people can't go to them. I go to swimming holes that my father went to, that people my grandparents' age went to, that they've been going to the same places for so many years.
Even at my age of only 24, I feel like I've already began to witness sort of the cycles of things. And for my part, I'm just going to do what I like doing. And whether that meshes in with a greater sense of what my generation is going to be known for, I'm not sure. But I like doing what I do, you know. I'm just a Catskill boy. I'm not really fed into the utopian dream of Woodstock as an arts colony. I think I just happen to be born here. I suppose I do fit in with the Woodstock ethos of doing what I like doing as long as I don't harm anyone. But I think essentially that's a pretty human ethos. And you know, if what Woodstock really can be known for is a place where people can be natural, you know, and conform to sort of more natural order, then yeah, then I suppose that I would be a very Woodstock guy.
7, you're going to Jesus? To see Siobhan? Yeah, I am actually. Yes. Cool.
Yep, that was one of my later works. Definitely did.
I think there's less room for enjoyment now because we have historical knowledge of the 60s, and the fact that a lot of people spent their youth being a part of something they thought was going to last forever. And we know that that didn't happen because a lot of our parents or our parents' parents are paying for the decisions that they made in the 60s, or completely living different lives because of the way they acted in the 60s or when they were growing up. Because now they've come to terms with the fact that I have to live in this society, I have to be able to take care of my children, my grandchildren, myself when I want to retire. And so we know that now, and I mean, it's hard for me to relax in a way that I think that people were able to not really care about what they were going to be doing when they're 40 years old.
It's kind of hard to imagine my future that far ahead at this age, I guess. Hopefully living in a nice little apartment somewhere. That's about as far as I can imagine. And hopefully successful, but who knows?
As the gallery show came to a successful conclusion, the participants learned that funding for the program had been discontinued.
I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah,
I need something to stand on.
I love it. It's great.
where would I go from here? That's kind of the scary thing, is that I don't really know, you know. And I mean, now that I'm out of high school and indie is gone in any kind of tangible form, you know, I'm sort of experiencing a lack of direction. And I think that's why indie was so important. I don't think I would really be feeling that if indie had survived.
Catch it. Not that heavy. You okay going backwards?
I knew Hervey White very well growing up as a boy. I would often walk down from our house, which wasn't far away, where I lived with my mom and dad and sisters. I was about 10 or 12, and one of the questions I asked him just popped into my head. I seemed to know that he'd have an answer for it, and I asked him, when do the leaves start to fall in the fall, in the autumn? He gave me an answer. October 20th. That was the year 1944. And I remember waking up that morning, looking out the window and wondering if more leaves would fall today on the 20th than they had on the 19th or would on the 21st. I don't know if they ever did. But the leaves fell that day. It was the day that Hervey White died. And that's the way I remember it. October 20th. 1944.
When Hervey died, then the undertaker tried to dress him up in a tuxedo, and Lucille Blanche took full charge. She said, oh no, she said, we're going to bury him in his Russian smock. And she put the smock on, and the undertaker would comb his hair, and Lucille would muss it up. And then it was an open coffin, and the musicians played. And they at the Maverick concert hall. It was the most emotional funeral I've ever seen in my life. And it was the end of an era. You realized it was the end of that era, the whole thing. Gene was in the war.
And Gertie washed his blouse.
Yes.
Russian blouse
yes.
that he wore.
And he looked very normal. And then there was, when he was buried at the Woodstock Cemetery, Rondo read a poem, and that was the end of it. He had no religion, didn't believe in God or anything as far as I know. I don't know.
Ralph Radcliffe Whitehead's last summer at Birdcliff was in 1928. That November, Ralph Whitehead Jr. was embarking on a long trip to South America. His parents threw a huge going-away party, and among the many guests was Hervey White, who had not visited Birdcliff since he left its rolling grounds and dark brown houses and buildings in 1904. The ship, the Vestries, on which young Whitehead sailed, sunk in the stormy waters of the Atlantic. Ralph Jr. was among those lost. His father, now 74, never recovered from the shock and died the following year. Jane Whitehead, with her son Peter, remained in Birdcliff, renting buildings to artists. She began veering away from her former active role as a working artist and leader of Birdcliff herself, as she increasingly spent more time exploring mysticism and her belief in reincarnation. When Peter Whitehead took over possession of Birdcliff after his mother's death in 1955, he sold much of the land, but maintained its heart as an arts and crafts centre. From the terrace of White Pines, where his mother once watched students perform traditional English folk dances, Peter could see the valley of the Sawkill thickening with houses built for industrial employees. And more uneasily, he was aware of another element which was building up strength in Woodstock. That so-called element was made up of the young people known to most locals as the hippies. Peter died in 1976, and the Woodstock Guild inherited Birdcliff from the Whitehead estate. For over half a century, the Maverick and Birdcliff colonies, along with the Arts Students' League, continued as magnets, drawing artists and creative thinkers to Woodstock, defining it as a place where bohemian lifestyles and creative energies planted the seeds for the coming age of Aquarius and the Woodstock Nations Festival in 1969 that defined the 60s and shaped the decades beyond.
The idea is to go out in a blaze of art, blaze of writing, blaze of rebellion, blaze of Occupy Wall Street, standing up for what's good and decent and just, and fuck 'em.
Noli in spiritu combueri. Ah, some people slip on that ladder, hang by the rungs for 20 years. Some people turn their backs on their dreams, become a Tory like Robert Southey, refuse to be burned out. Some people fake a burnout, rubbing themselves with charcoal, bitterly bickering bitter shitters, cursing fate when lunch is late. But the saddest are not the burnouts, but the burn-ups, a stomach full of blood, an overburdened liver, a shotgun in the face, and 20 years of grief for those who love them in the flames. Noli in spiritu combueri. Ah, throw your leaflets on that river while the eagle pecks your liver. So long, Zabo, so long, Al, so long, Crabtree. Ay, ay, ay. The answer is not to be laid back, not to be cynical, not to be hesitant, not to be shy, not to be uninformed, not to be beaten down, not to be isolated, not to be frightened, not to be threatened, not to be co-opted, and not to be lied to. Noli in spiritu combueri. Ah, refuse to be burned out. Refuse to be burned out. Refuse to be burned out.